Welcome to another DragonLance Saga Dungeon Mastering 101 episode. It is Palast Frostcult, the 29th. We are at the cusp of a whole new year. Pretty exciting, right? Not if it's the same as this past year, not for me. And today I'm continuing my Dragonlance gaming series all about dungeon mastering. Today we're going to discuss running sessions to shaping campaigns in this Gateway to DM101 Advanced Skills episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, and you can always, of course, support the channel by becoming a patron on Patreon or a member. And you can always pick up Dragonlance Media using my affiliate links in the description below. All right, so the entire point of all of these DM101 is to become better. That's not to say I have all the answers, because I don't have all the answers. I just have what works for me, and I just share that. And if you have tips or tricks or ideas that work really well for you, I would love to hear them. So please put them in the live chat if you're joining live, or put them in the comments after the video if you're watching it after the fact. Really appreciate it. And look, other people are going to read those comments as well. So you're not just benefiting me, you're benefiting other DMs as well. So let's have a conversation. All right, so before I get into my different segments about, the sort of points of advanced dungeon mastering as I see it, at some point, every single dungeon master crosses a sort of a threshold, as it were. You're no longer struggling to keep the game moving. You feel like you got the ground underneath you. Your rules, they feel comfortable. You're familiar enough with the rule system that you're not constantly double checking. Improvisation doesn't actually scare you anymore. Like you're feeling pretty used to just riffing whenever it comes up. And yet something still kind of seems to feel flat in your gaming, in your campaigns, in the sessions themselves. So when we think about advanced dungeon mastering, we have to think that it's not just about the prep anymore, and it becomes more about the complexity of the storytelling, right? Hey, Chris, how you doing, man? Your go-to attack is jumping on the ogre's back and getting shaken like a ragdoll as a kid. It's a pretty good move. It's about intentional pressure. That's what we're thinking about when we're thinking about advanced dungeon mastering, right? We're thinking about long-term payoffs, and we're thinking about thinking beyond the current session about how to then bring back interesting involvement that was alluded to, foreshadowed in past sessions. And this is all leading into ultimately DM101 Advanced Skills, right? So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the shift from moment to moment as dealing with basic dungeon mastering into thinking about long form moments, right? So beginner DMs often think about scenes, individual moments. Intermediate DMs tend to think about sessions. What am I going to do in this individual session? Advanced dungeon masters really think in terms of story arcs. And their focus shifts from what happens next to what is being set up, will this matter later on, and how do players' choices echo forward? So advanced dungeon mastering is about shaping a trajectory, not just content that you're dealing with. And when I'm talking about story, I'm not talking about something that is finely tuned and mapped out, because a story is organic. It grows with every player choice and every setup that the DM provides based on those choices. And so you really have to, and we've talked in the past, we've talked about improvisation, and we've talked about having a basic structure and not railroading. But how do you not railroad when you have a story you want to tell? Well, it's actually really simple. You create a rough outline. You create plot points that you want to hit, and you let the characters take the reins in how you get there. But what makes a great dungeon master from an average dungeon master is being able to course correct or adjust the actual tracks when the characters get off of them. Because ultimately, you're not trying to force players to do anything. You're trying to adjust any type of story that you had planned into what the characters are deciding to do. And sometimes that goes wildly off the rails, and sometimes you can actually bring it back. For example, I've got all sorts of examples about stories going wildly off the rails, but one of the most recent and most interesting, I think, is the Vampire the Masquerade game that I'm playing with my friends. I say I'm playing, but it's been like a year and a half or something since the last session, where the whole setup, I have 3-act structure. The whole premise is there are murders happening that are being blamed on vampires. And so the vampire players have to find out who is committing the murders before their prince shows up and starts whipping their ass for not, maintaining the masquerade, which is keeping vampires hidden from the real world. And so their whole job is just to investigate a murder. That's it. But instead, they're going to strip clubs and blowing them up. They're finding high school girls and convincing their grandmas to hook their girls up with some other rando boy in the neighborhood. They're planning to go to their prom that's going to be happening. I mean, stuff that makes zero logical sense for my 3-act story arcs. And yet, we're still on the track for finding out who the murderer is, dealing with the prince when they show up, and going to prom. So I would make an argument, if you can keep a story going with that insanity in place, you can pretty much deal with any situation that's going to be thrown at you. And yeah, nothing is more off the rails than a bunch of ancient vampires going to a high school prom. You're absolutely right, Chris. But we're going to be doing it in a week. So we're going to be doing it in a week. So ultimately, it is something where you just have to keep in mind that the point is fun. And so let the players have fun, but also make sure that they're aware that every choice they do make has an impact. So look, the bottom line is if they don't find the murderer before the prince comes, there could be real consequences for that. And I'll get into some of this later on as well with different decision makings and villains and stuff. But it is really important to make sure you always remember that every choice a player makes has consequences, has reactions in the world around them that is separate from the players. Another really good example is, and I talked about this last week, is the recent situation where a player forsook their god. Another god stepped in to fill that vacuum because they were open to, they wanted a different god to pay attention to them, but they got what they got. And then pandemonium happened because of that choice. The greater world at large is not there to cater to the whims of the characters. Consequences do exist, and that's what makes player choices so important. So when players see that the consequences of their actions have gravity to them, they start thinking a little bit more, and they start appreciating the choices that they make a little bit more, and they start planning a little bit more. And it's not just this, off the cuff Looney Tunes episode, doing whatever you want and having a good old time. Now suddenly your characters are grounded in the world. If you murder someone in town, you're probably going to be taken up by the constable. I mean, that's just the reality of things. So you always have to keep stuff like that in mind. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, Chris. Sith the Brick, how you doing? Yeah. All right. So the next segment I want to talk about is designing for consequence. So consequences are what give player choices weight, as I already mentioned. Advanced consequences, they're delayed, they're layered, and sometimes you don't see them until much later on. So when we have, I don't want to tip my cap, but when we have players making choices in the campaign and they think that, well, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. So if there's a big bad that's revealed and you confront this big bad and the big bad gets away, do you think the players won? Well, maybe they won that encounter, or maybe they just survived that encounter, but that big bad is going to resurface somewhere down the road. And now they know what you look like, they know what you're capable of, and they're going to be becoming more prepared. So you always have to think about, and the players I play with are actually really good with this, where they try to capture someone rather than murdering everyone in most cases. They try to capture someone to question them. And this actually is a really great tactic. One, you don't even have to do battle at all. You could actually just negotiate the information once you come across an encounter. It rarely ever happens, though. And so they need information. Well, the best source of information are the bad guys. So don't kill them all. Grab one and find something out. And then if you let them go, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to go back to their higher up and they're going to report everything that they just told you. If they're smart, or if they really fear their big higher up, they might lie. Imagine a bad guy lying, and frame you for something, in which case they're going to be coming after you again. And so it's always this really difficult dance of players making choices in the moment. Well, should we wipe them all out? Would my character murder everyone? Like, you know, what are the consequences for my character for engaging in this act? You know, one thing, if you're playing a really holy character, like a lawful good cleric or a lawful good paladin, there are things that go down the line with those types of characters. They're not just classes that you can do whatever you want with. They actually have like oaths that they have to swear to their gods. They have lines in the sand that they cannot cross in that class. And it's not just them. I mean, of course, every class has those versions of activities that they just would never engage in, or they're just moral choices on the player character's part or whatever it is. But understanding those character lines and sticking to them is really, really interesting and great role-playing. However, when they break those lines, when they step over those boundaries, because in the moment they're not considering it, or they just don't think it really applies to the campaign world, well, I'm here to tell you, always make it apply in the campaign world, because those consequences are going to come and hit them hard later on if you're doing your job as a dungeon master. For example, there was a lie by omission by one of the characters about some people entering into the encampment, which ended up in a murder in one of my campaign adventure sessions. That lie by omission meant the god was dissatisfied with their worshiper, and so they failed to grant them spells when they wanted them. Now, you can make the argument, and I don't think it's a fair one, but you can make the argument that, hey, this is Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. When a cleric calls upon a god's power and they grant them a spell, they can't just willy-nilly take that away from them or not call, once, or not answer once they're called upon. And I would say wrong. They absolutely can. The god is the one that has the power. The adherent to that god is the one begging for that power. And if you don't follow that god, there's no reason for them to give you that power. So you have to follow the dictates. And look, it doesn't have to happen immediately. Maybe let it build up a little bit so they really get it across in their player characters' heads that, wow, when I go against my god's mandates or dictates, they really do bite me in the butt. For example, again, if they have a history of not behaving as the god would want them to behave, and then they're in a moment, sessions later, when they just desperately need their god's help, and they call out in battle or after battle or something, please help me, I need your help, in the form of a spell or a ritual or something, just have the god completely abandon them. Because that's what the god would do. If you're not following the god, why would the god be there for you? So they just walk away. They turn their cheek and just don't listen to you anymore. And then suddenly you are just a feckless NPC with no power because of your choices. And now, if you want to get in that god's good graces, you're going to have to work for it. So it's all about designing consequences for player actions and not having them always hit immediately. Let it build up slowly over time. And I would make an argument, especially in Dragonlance, because the idea of good-evil balance is more important in Dragonlance than it is in any other campaign setting. Okay. So when designing outcomes, ask yourself, who notices this action that the player takes? Who's going to benefit from that action? Who is harmed by that action? And what does this action do to destabilize an faction or an environment or a situation or a town or whatever? If you can answer all of those, then you have a built-in process of a story for consequence. Who noticed this? Well, the big bad guy that wasn't even involved in the conflict at all was looking in. They were either scrying or, watching their henchmen carry out their dirty work, or maybe a henchman got away. Who benefits from the players defeating them? Does it destabilize two different factions? Who's harmed by the choices? Is it the player themselves based on their choices? Or is it someone else, some tertiary NPC that is going to be biding their time for the right moment to get even or to strike back? And then who does this destabilize? Is the party now going to be fractured because of this choice? Is trust lost between players? And it's going to rear its head later on in a campaign when trust is desperately needed. Story beats like this are what really make mediocre campaigns really good campaigns. A choice that changes nothing is not, in fact, a choice at all. So remember, every choice that your characters make has to have a consequence, in the same way that in our real world, every choice we make has a consequence. If you have a job that you rely on in order to pay your rent or your mortgage, and you don't show up to that job and you get fired, well, that was a choice you made, and now you're going to have to suffer the consequences of not being able to pay your rent or pay your mortgage. That's life. You don't have money because you stopped going to your job? Well, guess what? Now you need to buy food. How are you going to do that? There's genuine consequences in life. Apply them in game, and you're going to realize that your players are paying infinitely more attention, and they're going to be choosing their actions much more closely. But more importantly, it's going to give you as the DM an opportunity to bring back those consequences later on to make sure the players really feel that this is a living world that they actually affect. And when I say consequences, it's not always a bad thing. In some cases, consequences are a good thing. Like the reactions of your choices. Do you use the DragonLance alignment table that is affected by the character choices? Yes, I do. What if the characters complain? They always do, but I'm the DM, and I make the final choice. They don't. Those are the rules. If you don't like it, then you don't have to play in my games. This is just part of why I love DragonLance, and so I choose to play it the way it was designed. Sake-san, thanks for tuning in. All right, so the next segment I wanted to talk about is foreshadowing that pays off. So foreshadowing is not hinting at things. It's preparation entirely. So effective foreshadowing is subtle. It appears more than once. It feels obvious only in hindsight. So I ran another example, a Dergard Keep campaign where the heroes have to go into Dergard's Keep and stop Lord Soth from opening up a portal to the Abyss. That's the adventure. It's in DL6 Teen World of Krynn. Really great adventure. Never been able to finish it. Played it twice, and it was always a TPK. Anyway, Banshees got them both times. And so you go into it knowing that Lord Soth has Banshees. Okay, so that's the first foreshadow. This is a problem we have to address. Never addresses it. And then you start crawling around the dungeon. If you're not outside, like at an outside window, you have no idea what time of day it is. And so you have to have some mechanism in order to track what time of day it is. Finding windows to look outside and see where the sun is. Having a familiar flying outside that can report to you. Literally burning candles as you're moving through a dungeon. Just little things like that to try to keep track of time. But if you don't, well, then you don't know what time it is. You have to kind of guess and hope that it's not time for the Banshees to come out. And when they do, make sure that you cannot hear them. Because if they sing, you have to make a saving throw. And if you don't make that saving throw, you die. Full stop. There's no like, oh, I'll just bind wounds later. No, you're dead. So the characters were crawling through and they got to this. One, they already know the banshees exist. Two, they get to this hallway and they're passing through the hallway and it's completely silent. You can't hear anything in the hallway. If you're in the hallway and people are on one side of it, you can't hear them at all. So this is a hint that there might be banshees on the other side of this silent hallway, or something that is going to affect you if you hear it, because otherwise there's no reason for a silent hallway in the middle of a keep. There's just literally no reason for it. And so they go through the hallway and they start opening doors, and guess what's on the other side? Banshees which sing and kill them all. So you foreshadow that things could happen. You give them more than one clue about something that's coming, something that's going to happen. And if they don't pay attention, they suffer the consequences of it. Now, that's a really quick situation that could happen over the course of 3 or 4 sessions. You can foreshadow over long-term storytelling. So, for example, right now, I'm foreshadowing events that are going to be happening probably in a year and a half in my campaign that I'm running Tyranny of Dragons in. And it's not even going to be realized until a year and a half. But the seeds have been laid. And there's little drip drops that are happening every once in a while. Not enough and not frequently enough to be picked up on, I don't think. Maybe they are. But once the end result happens, people are going to be like, oh my gosh, we knew that was coming. We knew that was coming, because hindsight is always 20/20, right? So you always want to be subtle with your foreshadowing. You always want to make sure you're letting them know more than once. Whether they pay attention or not is one thing, but you're sort of tipping your hat. And then obviously it's going to feel obvious in hindsight. So a way to do this, you can plant rumors, you can plant symbols, you can plant recurring NPCs, you can plant repeated phrases or unexplained reactions. All of those could lead up to some great event that if they would have known about ahead of time, they could have avoided or known how to deal with better. But because they didn't pay attention, or you were just so subtle that they don't realize it until after the fact. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to have to kill them all because of it. That's not what foreshadowing is always going to end in. And really, it shouldn't end in that hardly ever. My example was just because it did happen, and so I wanted to bring it up. Really, foreshadowing is best done when it's a payoff, and that is most times a good thing for players, right? You don't want to hurt the players. You want to encourage the players. So when the payoff arrives, players should say, we should have seen this coming. Maybe. Hopefully, if you did your job as a DM well, they should have seen it coming. And a player realizing that tells you that you did in fact drop those secrets, and they did in fact realize it after the fact. So always think about foreshadowing when it comes to major plot devices or events. Don't just throw them at people on the spot, because then it looks like you didn't do any planning and the players had no choice and no effect on the world around them to get to that point. You want to make sure that every choice they make feels valued in the world. It has some sort of consequence, and that consequence will ultimately lead to something that's been foreshadowed because of that consequence, or because of those choices. All right, so the next one I wanted to talk about was villains with purpose. We've touched on this a little bit. I want to touch on it a little bit more. Advanced villains are not obstacles. They are counter-arguments. So think about that for a second. That means that the heroes have one perspective they've lived their entire lives with. Maybe it evolves a little bit, but they know we're the good guys. We're the ones stopping the bad guys from doing the bad things, right? But the bad guys don't ever see themselves as bad guys unless it's a Saturday morning cartoon. Every bad guy I've ever met in real life that I would perceive of as a bad guy actually sees themselves as self-involved. They're motivated for their own reasons, but they don't see themselves as a villain. It's just a different perspective. And so what a really great Dragonlance example, and I've spoken to this before, but I'll do it one more time, is the Knights of Takhisis. Everyone saw them as a bad guy. Everyone. Until they took over your town. And then crime went down, order was maintained, and prosperity ensued. So suddenly, The occupied, under Knights of Takhisis rule, and this is, of course, before the Summer of Chaos, people were actually divided on whether they didn't like them or not, because they actually saw the benefits of having them around. And when the Dragon High Lords came, they just went to full evil again. But before that, they were honorable. They had a sense of honor and justice. It just was different than what people were used to. And so having this counter argument instilled within your villains, your bad guys, makes them instantly compelling and just more alive to the game world and to the players in the game world. So a compelling antagonist has a belief system, a vision of a better world, their version of a better world, methods the players find unsettling, which then puts them in opposition, and reasons to think that they are in fact right. If you don't have all of those things, then you just have a Saturday morning cartoon. And that's not interesting. It's not compelling to players to want to engage with, and it does not create a good villain at all. It just creates a monster they want to walk over. So you need to ask yourself whenever you're putting together your campaigns with these villains, what truth does the villain believe? Okay, so let's say Verminard, for example. He believes that the Dark Queen, he is, first of all, the first cleric that has been sent out by Takhisis. Well, the first cleric since the Cataclysm anyway, but his god Takhisis, everything he's doing is to further her reign. And through her reign, he will find individual power. So the truth he believes is might is right. My Dark Queen has my back, and I'm going to do everything to further her goals because it's going to give me power. What flaws makes them dangerous? Ego makes Verminard dangerous. He believes that first of all, he's a cleric, and so he's a fanatic. But also, he actually believes that he is in fact right, and the Dark Queen should reign over all of Ansalon. That's a terrifying idea, and it is inherently dangerous because she don't give a damn about you. She'll totally forsake you, as she has. And then how are they a mirror to the party? Well, in Verminard's case, he's literally a mirror to the protagonist of Goldmoon as the only other cleric in the time of the Age of Despair, right after the Cataclysm. But it's just another way of framing this idea of giving the player characters who are the heroes an antagonist that is a hero in his own right, thereby creating a supervillain. So a hero is not heroic if they're just facing off against monsters every once in a while and slaughtering them and moving on to the next monster. They need someone that can stand up to them. They need someone that can foil their plans. So plans that the heroes can then foil of the villains. They need someone who is equal and opposite. Lex Luthor to Superman, for example. Someone that is intelligent and believes in what they're doing. So the best villains challenge the players ideologically, not just mechanically. So I would say arguably the very, very best villains are the ones where you're like, as a hero, you know what? I can kind of see their point. Like, I don't really want them to be the one to enact their plans because they, it'll probably end up in disaster with the Dark Queen at his back, but I get what he means, I mean, you always want those types of villains. Kidiar is a perfect option for this. She is self-interested. She is actually really great to her troops, paying them on time and stuff. She is wildly exciting as a character because of how she turns the coin on its head of how men traditionally would want to use sex as power. And now she's the one doing it. And she's an incredible villain. Like, she's good at defeating foes and standing up to the heroes. Just a really great villain that sometimes you're like, maybe I kind of want to champion Kidiar a little bit. And you're like, but she's a bad person. She enslaves people and she murders, but she's kind of badass too. Those are the best villains. So make one for yourself, and more importantly, make one for your players to face off against. All right, so the next one I wanted to talk about, Mina. Mina is a great one. The next one I want to talk about was Kim. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you. Campaign structure and narrative beats. So advanced campaigns are not plotted out, they're structured. So you need to think in terms of arcs, not rails, beats, not scripts, and pressure points, not paths. So, I touched on this a little bit earlier, so let's do it one more time here because the way that I always create my stories, if it's not a module, is I create a 3-act structure for the overarching campaign, a 3-act structure for every session in where it fits into that campaign. Now, because I'm only roughing in the acts, I'm not creating a rail for characters to follow. I just have a story beat saying I need the players to have this happen in the first act, and I need the players to have this happen in the second and third acts. And if they hit those marks, then I move on. If they don't hit the marks, then I try to figure out another way of presenting those potential marks for the players to then hit. What I never do is say, well, don't do that. How about instead you do this? Because you're taking away player agency in that point and you have a railroad. You don't ever want to do that. Let the players find their own path, and that's why it's so easy to do the 3-act structure, because there are no rails. You're just getting to it when you get to it. And once it hits, then you know your story is progressing. So useful structures are rising tension leads to rupture, leads to fallout. Stability leading to disruption, leading to transformation, or mystery leading to revelation, which then leads to consequences. So you're always presenting the characters with these options or an environment which they have to then engage with in some way. And if they say, I don't want to engage with that, I'm going to go do something else, that's fine. Where are you going to go? Okay, well, I know in this game world, if you're going to this area, these are the things that are happening. So here's another environmental situation that you're going to have to deal with. Or here's an external NPC situation that you're going to have to deal with. So you're always, if you know your game world that you're playing in, if it's your own campaign, then it's really easy. But if you don't know the campaign world that's not your own, you really should be doing your homework beforehand so that you're planning for players to go off the rails. That's what they will always do, in my experience anyway. So make sure you're informed of what's going to happen on the other side of those rails. Structure does actually give freedom meaning, right? So we're not creating a rail saying you have to do this and then this and then this. We just have basic ideas. And once we have that structure, the players have the freedom to go wherever they want and do whatever they want to do, because they're still going to hit the beats of that 3-act structure that you had already set out. You just need a setup, you need a result, and you need the consequences afterward, right? So the mystery is the setup. The revelation is the result of realizing what that mystery might mean. And the consequences are the choices that the characters make based on that revelation. I just think it's such an easy way to tell stories. And it, again, if you can improv, then it gives you as a dungeon master infinite ability to just do whatever the hell you want in any given situation, which will eventually build out the world, but also make the characters feel like everything they're doing is actually their choice. They're affecting the world around them, not the world affecting them, forcing them to do things. Agency is really important. All right, I mean in life in general, but especially as a role-playing game. All right, so player arcs as campaign engines is the next thing I want to talk about. Player arcs as campaign engines. And this is why I don't like to have players give me a full detailed backstory, because that needs to develop and inform the campaign moving forward. If you have it all worked out ahead of time, it's not going to be influenced as heavily later on, right? So have some story beats, but then let the DM play with that. So at an advanced level, player characters are not passengers, they're drivers, right? And we've been talking about this so far. So you want to use their backstories as unresolved questions in the campaign moving forward. Relationships that they have as leverage in the campaigns moving forward. Personal goals that they have as story hooks, moving forward. One great one that I had in Tyranny of Dragons, I did not know was going to happen. I was totally surprised, but the players got together and two of them said, hey, let's be connected in some way. So we had a Kender who had a Draconian, an Auroch Draconian, as her son because she found him in the egg and raised him. This completely threw me for a loop. I didn't know what the hell I was going to do, but the first chance I got to do a one-shot, it was based around the idea of how she originally found that egg. Now, it didn't involve the egg yet. It just involved a map that would lead to the egg. And so as soon as they finished the adventure and that was dropped in her hands, she was like, oh, it was like this intimate expression of joy because suddenly she felt like this whole thing was a setup for her backstory and for the other character's backstory. And it was. It was just a way to make them feel special in a moment. And it ended up paying off wonderfully because then we had these other major personal backstories of the father that was then murdered by the cult, which led the character originally to be involved in the campaign. But then this father is the one that's going to be leading her to find this Draconian. And so this builds a relationship with the father, the importance of that to the daughter, so that when he dies, she is now on a furious mission to go find the murderers, which then leads right into the campaign beginning, right? So you're using their backstory to inform the choices that they're going to be making later on, totally setting up and reinforcing the importance of the campaign itself. I've got another character right now whose backstory, it's been tipped a little bit, but it hasn't actually been revealed, and it won't be revealed probably for another year on how intimately connected they are to the campaign. But it's going to be something where they're going to have to really make some choices that are very, very difficult to be made. And it's going to have genuine consequences to the rest of the party and to themselves and to the campaign as a whole, simply because they wanted to play a certain type of a character. And the way I integrated that is going to be campaign defining. So that's something I'm really, really excited for. So always use their backstories as part of furthering the purpose of them being involved in the campaign itself. So you want to weave character arcs into faction conflicts, into villain motivations, and into world events. If your characters are not intimately involved in the story that you're telling, there's no reason for the characters to engage in that story. All right? I'm going to say that again. If the characters are not intimately involved in the story you're telling, there's no reason for the characters to involve themselves with the story. You have to make sure that they're intimately connected. It doesn't have to be through a parent. It doesn't have to be through anything. It could literally just be they're from a specific area, and that specific area has a problem, and the hero steps in to solve it. It could be a friend that comes back and says, "Hey, I knew that you were always wanted to go adventure. I need some help. Do you want to come help me?" Just something really simple and basic like that. But the point is to involve them in the world, encouraging them to engage with the world. All right, so when the world responds to who the characters are, then investment in that world from the characters skyrockets. We always want to make sure that, and we saw this, of course, most recently in the Tyranny of Dragons campaign with the Kender dying and the Draconian going and searching for her and having that affect the character on a very deep level and affect all of the other party because of that. These characters' choices really sunk everyone into the world because their choices affected the world around them. All right, so the next and last point I want to bring up is managing complexity without overload. And what this means is advanced play introduces more moving parts, but clarity is still king. Now, everything that I'm covering can seem pretty daunting to a dungeon master when they're plotting out a campaign. But it really shouldn't, because a lot of this is just story beats that are unraveled through the course of you listening to the players and reacting to their choices with the world that you're running. And so you're really just responding more than you're actively planning over the course of the arc. What you're doing is you're taking notes and you're deciding after the session how to weave those in later on. So you don't have to do it all before the campaign starts, and you shouldn't, because then you're railroading. So what you're doing is just responding to the players, and you're paying off what they do later on to make them feel involved, right? So only track what is actively changing in the world. You don't have to keep track of everything that's going on. So that frees you up significantly. Only react to what's changing. So are there other gods in motion in Krynn while I'm running the Tyranny of Dragon campaign? 100%. But I don't care what they're all doing. Are there other factions that are involved in other things? Yeah, absolutely. But I'm not going to deal with that until the players get involved with it. And then I'll worry about it, and I'll look into it, and I'll start thinking and just sort of getting a gestation period of plans or thoughts or things that could be. I won't put anything to paper. I'll just let it cogitate a little bit, just steep in my brain for a while. And then you want to summarize between sessions. I start every single session with last time on Tyranny of Dragons or whatever, Shadow of the Dragon Queen or whatever game I'm playing. I always do a last time on. This is not only to help the viewing audience remember, maybe they didn't watch any other episode or they didn't watch the last one, but also the players. It's a way for me to put down in words what was important about the previous session, what impact the players had on the previous session. So I don't cover everything that happened in the session. I only cover the things that are germane to what's moving forward based on what the players did last time. And so that summary initially is, I write it up the next day, I put it in Discord so the players can all see it, and then by the time we get to the next campaign game, the next gaming session, I just read it out right beforehand so that it's fresh in their head. They know what their goals are, they know what they just did, and they know what they have to do. And of course, the consequences and fallout based on what they did. Let factions act off screen. Just because the players experienced, let's say, the Legion of Steel in Salanthus, for example, doesn't mean they're only in Salanthus or they're only dealing with the players. Maybe they sent out a bunch of groups to go accomplish the same mission in different ways in different locations. Always keep in mind that every single faction in all your entire game worlds are actively moving, even if the players are not at the table. Now, try to keep your time tracking in line as a dungeon master, and this is why I love AD&D so much, because Gary Gygax really hammers home the importance of timekeeping, because it is important, especially in Dragonlance when you have moons to worry about, because they do affect magic, so always remember that. But also seasons. Environmental factors are real. If I started the campaign in spring, then they would be in, early summer right now. I started it in fall, and now it's winter, and they're trudging through snow and ice, and it sucks. So always think about environmental factors based on timekeeping, and ultimately allowing the world to continue operating regardless of what the players are doing. And then ultimately collapse unused threads. Don't keep trying to bring something back if players are just not into it. If you've dropped a few storyline hints a couple times and they just don't respond to it, just move on. I've done this so much in my games. In Tyranny of Dragons, in the caravan, it took us, I don't know, maybe 10 sessions or more to get through, maybe 13 sessions, I don't know. But there was a lot of story beats that I set up and that I tried to, keep like, oh, what about this? And they just didn't respond. I was like, all right, well, screw it. I'm just going to get rid of it then. And they were story beats that were germane to the actual adventure, but the players weren't interested. And so I just moved along and I didn't hang up myself on it. And I just wove in other plot lines in order to fill in the gaps. And it's really easy to do when you just listen to what the players are interested in based on how they act. People will tell you through their actions a lot more than they ever tell you through their mouths. That's where you find out the truth. So complexity should emerge naturally. It's just something that happens through the course of play because you're paying attention to the players. It does not happen all at once because you didn't plan it ahead of time, because it's the players that are creating that complexity that you're responding to. And you're just naturally allowing the world to react around them. And that's kind of all I had. Do you give players roles to help keep up the game? No, like Summarizer. No, I don't. I probably should, but no, I never have. Because ultimately, again, I use it as a way of reinforcing what's important to the players and how their choices have had forced the world to react to their choices, rather than just a synopsis. So it hyper focuses them on, oh, this is what we're trying to do. This is what we're going after. This is why we're doing what we're doing. And this is how we're going to influence the outcome of it. Rather than we went to the inn and we had a few ales and we talked about maps and, no one wants to hear about that. Yeah, it happened, but who cares? If it's not germane to the storyline that they're helping you create, then drop it out of the synopsis. All right, so advanced dungeon mastering is not about control. It's about cultivation. All right? Anyone can pick up a module and run through it. Anyone can create their own adventure and force the players down that path. But it's a great DM who goes through the motions of listening to the players, reacting with the world to the players' choices, dropping in hints and ideas, foreshadowing of events, and creating those villains that are impactful and memorable to foil the heroes' actions and for the heroes to foil their plans. You, as a DM, plant seeds. You apply pressure. You watch what grows based on the character's actions. So when you think in arcs, when you design for consequences, and when you trust your players to shape the world, you stop running games and you start building legacies. And that is your entry into Dungeon Mastering 201. All right. So what do you guys think? Do you have any other suggestions for advanced campaigns? What was your favorite villain you created for a campaign? Well, I'm running a module, so I didn't create this one. The one that I'm bringing in but I didn't create it. Let's see, the best villain for a campaign. I haven't done a campaign of my own since the Vampire the Masquerade, and that villain I can't say because it would then spoil the ending. But I think the players already know who it is, and I think it works because it defies expectation on what it is. But I can't really say at this point, to be fair. I would have to think about it and dig into my past non-module running. Like I did a villain. Oh, I can tell you one. I did a one-shot on this channel, actually. It was set in Nordmar, the jungles of Nordmar. It was a bit of a Conan the Barbarian flavor, but it was a bunch of Bakali who were tormenting the local Nordmarian human settlement. And the whole setup was that the Bakali lived there for eons before. Before any humans were ever on Krynn, the Bakali lived in this area. And when the humans were brought down and they ended up taking over, they subjugated and they destroyed many of these Bakali, and to the point where generations of them ended up going underground. And so you have this priestess who is running this operation of taking their children from them to stop them from procreating and stifling their expansion as a civilization. And so the heroes in that campaign had to go find the threat and destroy the threat, not knowing that the reality is that these were not monsters. These were people trying to defend their homeland that they had first. But, very much like colonialism. But the lizard people, the Bakali, were the monsters and the heroes were the humans. And so they just didn't see it that way until they faced off against them. And then the truth came out. And we never really had a follow-up to that, even though I had it planned. And, you know, the fallout of that is going to be it. So I love the idea of subverting expectation with the villain where, yeah, they're a bad guy. They're taking kids. But they were actually here first, and you murdered their entire civilization. So who's the bad guy here? You know? I mean, that's the vibe I get from it anyway. Anyway, I liked that one. I thought it was a lot of fun. And I always do that whenever I try to create a bad guy, is create something that you could see the characters having a beer with, you know? Like, out of the context of the immediate conflict, you know, they're not so dissimilar that they wouldn't sit around and though they have different personalities, they would still have a beer with each other. They may not agree, but at least they could still, you know, enjoy each other's company, have a few laughs. But because the world events are what they are, they're in stark opposition and they're having to face off. And that creates such better dynamics between players and villains rather than just bad guy with a twirly mustache trying to tie a maiden to railroad tracks. Snyder Whiplash, you know? Snidely Whiplash. Namardian campaign was good. You liked the quality involvement? Yeah, that was the one I was talking about. All right, so that is all I had for this episode of Dungeon Mastering 101, Advanced Skills. Do you have any techniques or story beats that you would like to share? What would you like to see covered in future DM201 series? And you can always feel free to email me if you don't want to put it in the comments there at info@dlsaga.com, or you can always leave a comment below if you're watching this after the fact. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. Ring the bell, and you can support the channel by becoming a patron on Patreon or a member on the YouTube. That's the most old man thing I've said all day. And you can pick up DragonLance gaming materials using my affiliate links in the description below. Thank you to creator patron Aaron Hardy, producer patron Azrael, and developer patrons Chris Androu and Sam Ruiz, and of course to all of the members of this YouTube channel. This channel is all about celebrating the wonderful world of DragonLance Saga. Thank you so much for joining in that celebration. Thank you for watching. This has been Adam with DragonLance Saga, and until next time, Slán Javar.